Really honored to be here with all of you today. All of the folks on the stage have been really important for me as a legislator in providing expertise and perspectives so that we can go, you guys, go like half the people in this room. In my day job, I'm an immigration lawyer, so this isn't my own subject matter expertise, and so I rely on the people who know what they're doing and have committed their careers to this work. So I'm just honored to be along for the ride in my role as a legislator. So I'm going to try to not take up much space because you guys, the ones who know what you're talking about. So for our first question, so we're going to be talking about restorative justice. The way that I came to this work is that my first legislative session, I was asked to take on the lead author role of the Veterans Restorative Justice Act. And we got that passed, and it was very exciting. And then I was on this bipartisan, bicameral working group, and Sarah came and spoke, and some other very smart people came and spoke. And there was like a real interest in looking at youth justice, and it was a bipartisan interest. And so I thought we should just take a veterans bill and put it on kids because they're like the same, right? And then I talked to all these folks and I was like, oh, this is really complicated. And so after a couple of years, we were able to get some really exciting legislation passed this last session, but our work continues. But anyway, that's my background and kind of how I learned about restorative justice and how I came to know these folks. So as our first question, let's talk about what we mean by restorative justice. And when we talk about it, we've talked a lot about accountability today and what does that mean in the context of restorative justice specifically. And I've been told to start at the end here and work this way. So, sorry to put you on the spot. My notes say start with Amanda.
All right. So there's a group of questions there. My name is Amanda Sealing. I know some of you, but I don't know all of you. I spent 15 years almost 16, as an assistant county attorney in Yellow Medicine County, which is a very small county in southwestern Minnesota. We have a total of about 10,000 people in our county, so it's not Hennepin County. But it's a fraction of Hennepin County. But my friends in the Hennepin County Attorney's Office would always be like, oh, let's talk about your juvenile justice division. I'm like, I am the juvenile justice division. That's where we're at. Which has advantages and disadvantages in terms of my ability to guide policy. And so we, in 2001, when I was still clerking for the judge in Madison County, we started having conversations about restorative justice. And so we worked, all of the stakeholders worked together to develop policy and procedures to do better for kids. And I think there was some magic involved there, and I'm not gonna lie about that, because we were all babies, new in our careers, and so didn't have as much formed ideas about how things had to be, and so we were able to be more flexible and creative than I think we would be even now. And so from my perspective, I don't have the authority or the privilege to define restorative justice. I think all of you probably have your own ideas and your own practices, and I think those are, the more we can do restorative practices, the better we are. And so, I hesitate to make any definition. I think when we think of restorative practices, for me, I think of thinking about how can we reduce the harm instead of punishing the offender. How can we hold them lovingly accountable? How can we get the community involved? How can we prepare, right? And so I think I've been thinking a lot about that idea of accountability, and I think one of the struggles, so as a prosecutor, I even as a baby prosecutor, I had some ideas about who was in control of the case that I had coming into the justice system. And so that idea of the system really needs to give control back to the community. One of the problems that we have is that our communities have way more capacity to handle harm in the community. And so having having them involved. So accountability to me is relationship. You're much more accountable if you're in relationship, and having a single PO involved with a kid is not the same level of accountability that you can have if you've got a group of 5 or 6 community volunteers sitting with a kid, going to their basketball game, or driving them to their job, or calling their friend who owns the hardware store to say, hey, I've got this kid and he really needs a job. That's accountability. And so I think that's where I'm gonna stop.
Sorry, I get really nervous. I'm really sweating up here. First, I want to say, KJ and Curtis, thank you so much. So much of what you guys said resonated with me, not only personally, someone who's been in foster care, but I have privilege behind that and seeing how things are different. But as a restorative practitioner and also someone who's worked in the system as a probation agent, I have a really hard time with defining restorative justice. How are we restoring something when so many people have never had justice? Using the term restorative practices. I struggle with the word accountability. Who am I to define what that is for a community? That's really hard. It's not mine. What I do know is that accountability, it is not punishment. And I know Sarah said that earlier this morning. It's not, and we need to stop acting like it is. Accountability is not shame. Shame needs to disappear. We were relationships before systems taught us how to be or how we had to be in relationship with each other. That's what we need to return to. And so when I think of accountability, I'm going to call out Jesse's back there from Young Medicine County. We drove all the way up there. When we look at accountability in the space of a circle, it's not ours to define. Our job with restorative practices is to create a space and bring community together and people that were impacted to define what they believe accountability needs to look like for this situation, this child, this community. And we need to bring everyone into that is part of the community, because those relationships are so important. Cara said this morning, what's our responsibility? What was my responsibility in the community? What did I see? What did I say? What did I not see? How are we seeing each child as an individual human and remembering their humanity? We're asking children when they've made big mistakes to be removed from the community and placed somewhere in isolation. How do we heal in isolation? We're herd animals, I think. You know what I'm saying? We need each other. If you're sick, do you heal better in the hospital with all the blinking lights and sterile situation, or do you heal better at home with your family and your community? If we want to talk about healing and accountability, that's what we have to remember. We're all related. We're all related. We're all responsible for every child. We're all responsible for each other up here. I don't get to decide. And when I was working as a correction officer, children would come to me. It was already decided how they should be held accountable. They had a prescription in front of them. I was just there to monitor that they were doing what they were supposed to do. That didn't work. It didn't work. Why are they coming back? I don't know. You didn't get to know who they are. You didn't get to know their family. You didn't get to know the values of their community. So there was no healing. They just checked off your list and came back. So for me, I feel like accountability and restorative practices is so hard to define, because really a lot of what it is respecting that humanity and that relationship. And I gotta get out of the way. I'm gonna create a space for people to do that, and I'm gonna get out of the way so that they can do that.
Hello, I'm incredibly humbled to be up here and in everybody's presence that I'm sitting amongst and looking out at, and I'm just trying to ground in that in this moment. When I think about restorative justice, I think of it as a return to culture. I think about deep time. I think the world over there's practices, and then there's practices of the land that we're on, this one land that we're on. I think about how we all don't use the same language for this, and as I get to know certain families, they might call it village, and that this impulse is something that we are born with. And I have elders that have humbled me and said I wouldn't necessarily call it justice until there's justice for all people, so I will call it restorative practices for now, because we are practicing getting there. Yeah, and in my own life, I'm thinking about how you said that violence is the language of the unheard. I was also thinking about, as a survivor of being a cycle breaker myself and about to be 8 years sober, that looks like that the healing of that violence in my life looks like having agency as a survivor over if I do cause harm or how the harm will be repaired. I am a part of that. And that looks like my dad and I working on, that I finally own a home, painting that project and moving through old hurt and getting to the other side of that old hurt differently and leaving more space. And so that's what restorative practices look like for me.
I'm Kevin Reese, Executive Director.
Woohoo!
When I think of restorative justice and accountability, I actually go to the actual language of it. The first time I was ever introduced to the word restorative justice was in a system setting. The first time I was ever held accountable was in a system setting. So as long as we're using that language with youth, it sounds like gun to them. It sounds just as violent and just as harmful as gun. Someone has a gun, get your hand out of my pocket right in this room right now. That's how it sounds to youth. And we are assuming that they are under the same social contract as us. And we are assuming that they have the same moral compass as us. And before we can get to accountability, we have to get to a responsibility that we all have this collective buy-in. Without collective buy-in, accountability is just a harmful term that's sold to you by a powerful person, a prosecutor, a judge, someone there to harm you. Everyone that has ever used that language with me has been a person that had more power than me, and they were there to harm me. So as long as we use that language, if we're not willing to take a step back and say, we need to actually change the way we explain this to youth, right? Because just like prosecutor, the word prosecutor for generations is a horrible term in our community because it's attached to an urban legend of this office that has sent many of us up the river. That's the same way that accountability sounds right now. It sounds like these are folks that do not understand my plight, does not understand my family background, the generational curses that I may have to break, the ones that I didn't even know that I was in, and now I'm in a courtroom and I'm being held accountable. But they're saying, I never said that I was with that, right? So before we can get to accountability, we need to get to collective buy-in. So that's where
Yeah, keep it up. No, I let me begin by saying what is not restorative justice, right, or restorative practices. I say that we have abducted the term and juxtaposed that with our criminal justice system. And I say, fuck that, right? Because that is bullshit. They are not supposed to be juxtaposed. Restorative practices is a cultural, value-centered, community-centered practice. It has nothing to do with the justice system, right? We continuously conflate, and every, with no disrespect to the county attorney here, right? Y'all give it up for our county attorney. Every county attorney now say, we want to be restorative practices. I'm like, stop. This was never meant to be run by your system.
Yes.
Right? Stop trying to be nice. Right? Stop.
Sorry.
Amanda never tries to be nice.
And so this is not a liberal practice, y'all. Right? The liberals in the room, I love y'all, but I don't trust y'all.
Yeah.
Right? This is not liberal, this is not conservative, this is human-centered, community-centered. Communities have the integrity and the responsibility and the accountability to repair harm. But when you start to institutionalize this practice, and then you make us dependent on your funding, like OJJDP, whatever that acronym is, right? They lock up our money and say, oh, we're gonna take federal money and give it to the state. I'm like, the state continued to harm us. Why are you giving money to the state? What, do we look stupid here? Do we have the agency to be trusted? Right? So stop this bullshit. I love y'all.
So,
Also, this question would have been great 20 years ago to Kevin when I was a youth. When I sit up here at this panel with all of us, this question would have been much better served to some youth who's actually in that space right now. And it's kind of that part of what we get to do when we get to talking fancy talk. We're talking accountability. And they may be using a whole entire different term.
yeah. Well, thank you all so much. I think, well, I have like a couple thoughts, and then I'm gonna start with Bo with the next question. But I think, Raj, you raised like the central challenge of the kind of this thought experiment where we're like, the current system sucks. It is harmful and it is ineffective. It is ineffective in serving our youth. It's ineffective in helping people who've been harmed to heal. And so we know like status quo is awful and we want to do something. And so like, how do you move from where we are to where we need to be? So we know that restorative practices are better, but how do we do that like, how do we make everything that is bad become everything that is good? Like, how do you get from here to there? And so I think the next two questions kind of relate to that central tension. And so I'll start with Bo, and we want to talk about like what opportunities do we see in utilizing this restorative framework to transform our youth justice system. And I'm so sorry, I thought of one more thing I wanted to say. Just about the way that Yellow Medicine County operates that I really appreciate is that the restorative justice department is outside of like the criminal legal system. So I know that's something that you've described to me. I can't think of any examples that you might have given, but how like when there's like a community like injury, that the community will turn to the department for circle and for dialogue. And so I think that that is like kind of a vision that I see as like a utopia where we can all like come together. Like I feel like so much. I think I'm the co-lead of this thing called Civility Caucus in the legislature, where we try to get Republicans and Democrats to not hate each other. So I think a lot about like, wow, if we could all just communicate better in a more healing, open way and like confront injuries and tensions, that we would be living in a better world. And I think that's something that I see the potential in, and something like what Yellow Medicine County's structure is. So we aren't like in the exact same place, but I feel like there's like a space in between us. Anyway, okay, moving to Bo. So what opportunities, like how do we acknowledge that the current system is harmful and terrible and ineffective? And how can we use restorative framework to get from where we are to where we want to be? No pressure. Yeah, just explain it to us.
Go further together. If you want to go far, you go together. That's such a big question. And so I'm like thinking about, if I'm just thinking about a young person, all I know how to do is speak from my experience. So I became a youth lawyer, and I worked mostly with youth who were runaway or at risk of, homelessness or being trafficked, and youth with disabilities. And I left that role because I was usually ending up negotiating with the parent about how to navigate the hard thing that they were going through as a family. And then I was like, that's not lawyer work really. Like, I mean, it is in the sense of how I showed up and I was a lawyer, but like, that's why I was like, I'm a facilitator, like of trying to find the way forward for people. And actually, when I talk to most young people, they don't want their business in court in front of a bunch of strangers. If we can figure this out with auntie, elder, whoever, I would rather do that through the relationship. Sometimes, a lot of isolation and disconnection are the big theme, and our system perpetuates that. And so when I think about building, if we're dreaming, I imagine trusting, like you were saying, kind of like we have to rebuild trust or build trust that never was, with families, with our young people, But they are the experts of their own life and the holders of their own destiny. And that looks like getting out of the way. We call it diversion sometimes. That to me is getting out of the way of something where you may not know. The court is not the forum for all experiences. It tries to find a singular truth. There is no singular truth in a moment of violence. There are all the people there and the experiences that they had. And so I see like a way forward when I'm dreaming about this. My role feels like harm reduction often on the way to abolition. We are embracing young people with their families. Community-based practitioners are holding this process and creating a space to slow things down so that they can happen differently or the conversation, like there's more room to breathe. I also think that another way forward is just creating spaces for us to dream in together, because there's so many barriers to that happening. Like, and if you don't notice the young people that we're talking about here, then why not? And what is in the way of us being together? And that's the answer to us being together and finding our way.
Thank you. Raj, would you like to kind of weigh in? Just like what are some of the steps along the way? Like I just wrote down what Bo said, harm reduction on the way to abolition. Like how do we do less harm as we try to get from here to like a better world where it is actually just, our justice system is just.
So I need some suggestions, y'all. Where are you? Brother, you did some good work. What's your suggestion?
You should go onto the mic
Yeah.
because people are watching.
Well, well, first off, let me introduce myself. I'm Kevin Dotson. I retired from the Minnesota Department of Correction as a lieutenant after serving 30 years. And met Kevin Reese at my facility and stuff. And we did a lot of good work on the Black History celebrations that we held at the facilities and all of those kind of things. One of the things that I found working in the system, especially when it came to juveniles, was the fact that there was no programming for the juveniles. There was no community-based programs either invited or allowed into the facilities to set up programs for them. And so for me, my administration just asked staff, would anybody volunteer to spend some time with these young kids that are locked up in an adult male medium security prison? And I volunteered, one of maybe two individuals that did that. And what we tried to do without any formal training, without any guidance, was to sit down and just talk with the young men in there. And what I found was that there was a lot of skill sets that they didn't have at 14, 15, 16 years old to even help them even look like an adult. They didn't know how to shake a man's hand the proper way, you know. And so I took it upon myself to try to help as best I could with the lack of skills that I had as a corrections officer. But what I found overall was the fact that if you are genuine about caring for another individual, no matter what atmosphere or what environment that they're in, they receive that. They picked it up. They know that that's the truth. That helped me build bridges with guys in my 30-year career, you know, with Reese. You know, it wasn't about, my viewpoint as an officer wasn't about me carrying the big stick or me forcing them to do things that I needed them to do. It was about building a relationship, building a rapport with the guys in which I can honestly talk to them and say, yo, man, you know, you're kind of fucking up here. I need you to straighten up. And without going to the aspect of sending guys to SEG or things like that, building relationships, building rapport with the youth and with anybody in corrections that is incarcerated, builds a connection in which, one, it helps them in a sense of they have a person that they can come to that they trust to advise them on how to maneuver through the things that they're going through that would not put them in a place where they're going to get more time, where they're going to go to segregation and all of those things. And as far as from a security standpoint, it allowed me to be able to intersect and stop incidents before they blew up, because I did have that rapport and had that trust. KJ, in his thing earlier today, struck me because what he said is absolutely true. And again, being a mentor back in 2015, I may have came across your brother if he was at Lionel, you know. And again, the hardest aspect of my role as being a so-called mentor was the fact that I didn't have no support. There was no support from administration. There was no support from my coworkers, because my coworkers, and not all of them, but most of my coworkers didn't view 14, 15, 16-year-old kids as kids. They viewed them as adults. And so when they did the things that a normal kid would do, like talk back or whether they had scraps or whatever, they got the full brunt of punishment.
Yes.
And it's hard to get that across unless you personally have that feeling inside yourself to manage your job and to manage this different kind of population. And so one of the things I had always suggested and what I wanted and what I hope for is for the DOC specifically is that, one, bring back their training for staff, new incoming staff when they come into the department, but also they need to train on empathy. They need to train staff on how to communicate with people in a respectful way and not from a powerlistic position. Raj here, and I don't even know if he remembers, came to Lionel Lakes, it's been maybe 10 years ago, to do a DEI training session. And it was for the upper echelon administration. And I somehow was able to maneuver myself to be in that class, me and another African-American staff member. And the class was so uncomfortable with the subject that me and the other black officer there were the only ones that were interacting with Raj, to the point where he said, "Can I get some other people to help answer questions?" And nobody wanted to do it, because a lot of them felt that DEI wasn't needed in corrections. A lot of them felt that they were scared to make those responses and state those responses, and that overall in the system, as far as staffing goes, most staff view their jobs from what they either perceive on television or what they perceive in society or what they perceive from their community, and how they deal with individuals that don't look like them or all of these kind of things. And my hope is and goal is that when it comes to restorative justice, whether it's Kevin's organization or other community organizations that have been here and that are working in our communities, that we can get those organizations inside the prisons to help give these young folks and these young people and these young men skill sets, so when they come back to the community, they can have at least a foundation to jump off on. So without taking any more points, I appreciate that.
So what I'm hearing is that at Red Wing, where they have signs that say restorative justice, that's not quite going far enough.
Real talk.
Yeah.
Now, you know, so based on what the brother has said, right, even by classifying people on panels as experts is all like so colonial, right? Let us decolonize this word. You are the expert. You just heard wisdom from the brother here, right? But we keep creating this colonized spaces and then say we want to do something that is so ancient, right, and wise, right? And now we say, oh no, Ramsey County, John Choi is all for, I love John Choi, but John Choi is all for restorative practices, but John Choi is still structured and thinks like a prosecutor, operates like a prosecutor, right? At the end of the day. So one of the things that I want to say, that this idea of liberation, right? So we have created original harm in this country, right? With genocide and enslavement, and how that continues to inform where we are today, right? 500 years later, 400 years later, that harm has not been in crisis space, right? And if they get over that crisis and get to that at-risk phase, right, we're not ready to invest in that because we will spend $1 billion when people are in crisis to throw them in prison. When they're at risk, we're like, well, we'll stand and watch them. I know you're gonna fuck up, I'll come and get you, right? But I don't have any resources for the families that are like, man, I need help, right? And they come to Sharon and say, no, I don't have a choice, send my kid to jail. They are at risk. And prosecutors hear that, it's like, see, parents are asking for kids to be in jail. Please tell me which parent here want your kid to be in jail, in prison. Please. Right? But that's the kind of things that we keep saying, right? That's what parents are asking for. So if we work through at risk, we can bring our communities to a safe space. And don't stop there. You are sitting on $18 billion debt, right? Let us get our communities to thrive. That is liberation.
Amen.
And I wish that more of my colleagues were here to hear this, because I keep fighting to put more money in intervention and prevention, like early on, like help kids from the beginning, not lock them up better. So there's a lot of talk about therapeutic, secure facilities, and I guess you can see how I feel about those. I would like to talk a bit about Yellow Medicine County and kind of how you moved over time from like looking at just like truancy to like more serious offenses, or I guess that's, well, maybe I have this wrong, but like my understanding of kind of how your evolution was is that it started very timid, and that over time you realized that more serious offenses were requiring more restorative intervention and more community-based supports. And so if you wanted to talk a bit about, so the question that this is stemming from is like what opportunities are there to transform our youth justice system, and I thought you could talk just a little bit about how it's gone for Yellow Medicine County over time.
Absolutely. When we first started, I think one of the most important things was that if we're going to ask communities to do work with children and families and ourselves, we need to come together and have a conversation about what that will look like. We need to have a restorative, or use a restorative process as adults and people, whether it's in systems or community organizations or community members. We partner closely with our tribe. We all have to be at the table and talk about what do we want? How are our children? I think having that conversation first in Yellow Medicine, so the adults could have a conversation and act like children and fight over who needed what power. We had to get that out of our system first. Because really what it takes is setting down the power and allowing communities, children and families. What we do is voluntary. So in the beginning, everyone wanted to say, well, we're only going to send this type of offense and petty offenses or, non-person offenses or that type of thing, and we're going to do this. It was basically a dispositional alternative is really how it started. And over the years, that has evolved into we don't have the right to tell communities how to handle harm. Someone spoke earlier about the victim and offender language. That needs to go away. We're all in community, and the community gets to decide how to handle what happened. And so we've evolved from, okay, we'll take this type of case and everyone will be in agreement that it comes to circle and this is what will happen. And it's always been voluntary for children and families. We will never have a UR court order to do this because children and families have told us that if it was court ordered, it would have just been one more person telling us what we had to do. Forget it. So we work with people who have wanted to make change, and we don't get to assume what those changes should look like based on my community norms. I get to bring a room full of people together, and they're going to talk about what happened, what the ripple of harm was, who's been impacted, and how your community is going to come together to make this whole again. So now, in Yale Medicine over years, the community calls us and says, we need a circle, someone's passed away. We need a circle in our school because there's rifts between children. People will call us and say, hey, this child got in trouble, can they do circle? We don't want them to go to court. Law enforcement will come to us and say, hey, we have a child who's 12 years old and he's gonna get charged with a felony criminal damage to property for breaking something with his brother at the park. We would prefer that he come to circle and we not charge that. So the evolution has been long. And I'm not necessarily proud of some of the ways that we started. But I will say, by having people that continue to ground us in this work, Raj has continued to ground our work group to help us to do better, that's important. These conversations that we're having today, that's important. We have evolved in Yellow Medicine now. We accept anything and we do anything. We were starting with circles for children who committed crimes in the community. That went so well after people set down their power and control and let the community handle it. And we saw amazing outcomes. And I'm not talking about reducing recidivism and the check boxes. We're talking about increased relationships, children and families feeling good and connected to communities. Victims coming to circle and at the end of the circle saying, I see you. You are not the monster I had in my head. I see you. I'm going to be part of this journey with you. That's the evolution. That's what Circle has done. Now we're working with families who are referred to child protection for many different reasons. Oftentimes, what are those reasons? Isolation, poverty. Our office went from being grant funded repeatedly with no idea of sustainability and us grasping at straws for funding to help children and families to now being 100% taxpayer dollars. Yale Medicine County has a department. I don't know that sometimes people have a hard time separating that from system. It's still county dollars. That's the people's dollars that went in and said, we want more of this. We want more restorative practices. We want more circles. We want the community to do more of handling this stuff because that's what we're seeing is helping. So like I said earlier, our evolution started of our judge said, one of our district judges at the time literally said, this is just the next flash in the pan. This is just the next pilot project. And we said, okay, probably. And we're gonna try it. And those parameters loosened and we built trust and we built allies and allies became accomplices. I don't have any other way to describe that. And that's my perspective from Yale Medicine County on that evolution. And when people ask me, how do we do what you do? My first response is going to be, don't do what we do. Don't do what we do. Sit down with your community. The one thing I would say that I would tell you to do if you wanted the outcomes that we're seeing, and here she said we're smaller, but you wanted to see some of the outcomes, my biggest thing moving forward, sit down like people are in this room, have those conversations, put down the power and fight it out first, then build. Don't drag children and families into it. When systems fight, children and families lose. Jesse and I are in circle all day, every day, and every night. We have to create ways that we are working with community and connecting families with community that know better than we do and who answer their phone after 5. Show up. That's all. All we are doing is walking next to people. That is literally all we are doing at this point. But in the beginning, everyone wanted structure and power around what that would look like. Now they're like, wow, we didn't realize we didn't need that. So I guess that's kind of the evolution of work.
Well, thank you. So I'd like to end with a round of stories because it's clear that restorative practices are really going to be different from community to community and really can't be defined in any one particular way. And so I thought each of our panelists could just take a minute and give an example of where they've seen restorative interventions really make a difference in a young person's life. And can we start with you, Kevin?
I'm gonna answer 2 questions. I wanna go back to the question around.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. How do we get from there to here? I think one of the things that's important is we need to focus on the why Like if it's a child is in the courtroom and a child did something violent, instead of us for our thirst for vengeance, the way that the system is set up is just a thirst for vengeance. There is no space for why. They're gonna say who, what, when, and where. But the why doesn't matter. And until we start working in the why, we're never getting to the real issue. And in the why is a mirror. We're the adults. We're a generation before them. The society that they live in is one that we created. So we need to also hold ourselves accountable and responsible. And whatever support, whatever it looks like working with this child, it should be rooted in their why. And they need to have a space to say their why. There's never been another place for them to actually say, this is why I feel this way. This is why I did that. They have been conditioned for their why not to matter. And as humans, we know our whys matter a lot. I would say I have no beautiful story about seeing restorative anything to do with systems. I would say I see it in prison. I've seen it in prison where there are folks whose friends has killed friends. I have friends of mine who's in prison for violent things against other people that I know. And inside the culture of prison, contrary to what like popular culture may believe, there's restorative practices happen every day. So inside of prison, that does not start a riot. That does not start a big gang fight. There are conversations around the harm that was done. We're all in this space. We can maybe fight a few times, where this is gonna be like a one-on-one fight, a fair fight. We're gonna fight a few times. We're all here for all of these years, and I've seen years later, these are the same folks. We're cooking meals together, we're supporting each other, and we come right back to the root of something. Damn, they got us all. We're all from the same community. We all have the same wishes for our own freedom and our own future. And that's why I've seen the most authentic restorative practices is with the most violent people in the state cohabiting with each other every day. That's what I've seen.
Well, thank you. Raj, would you like to go next? And then we'll double back.
Just to add on, I think back in 1963, 64, Dr. King wrote, right, in the Testament of Hope, he said there are 4 fundamental challenges, the whys, that we need to address. He said racism, militarism, materialism, and classism, right? And if we don't address poverty in that matter, if we don't address these 4 fundamental problems that face our communities, we will never get out. We will continue to repeat the cycle, right? Because we are all wedded with that enforcement compliance mentality to our bones. Somebody quoted, right, I think we run fast, right, from the continent of Africa, what they say, right? We run fast, sooner or later we'll find ourselves running alone. But if we do run together, right, we will go further. And how do we do that, right? And Dr. Manson, shout out to Generation to Generation. Yeah, yo, give it up for Dr. Manson. Dr. Manson took a case on. So I want to invite y'all to come with me, right? I'm walking in late, Rondo Library, as usual. DC Shanklin in the house. So I'm running in late, and I want y'all to come with me. I'm walking in, I'm thinking like, man, where is this room? And Dr. Manson is already there. She set the circle up, and I'm walking in, and she's like, come on in. And she's smiling. I'm like, man, I am late. And then I put my bag down, and here walks a young woman, and there was another dude with her. And I'm like, okay, what? Are they in the wrong room? They must be in the wrong room. They came in, and Dr. Manson greeted them, and they sat in the circle. And then here comes a mother with a stroller, and then a young man behind her. They walked in. Dr. Manson greeted them. They sat in the circle. And Dr. Manson said, why don't you sit here? I'm going to sit right across from you. And she said, let's begin, right? So we did some grounding, acknowledgement of enslavement and genocide, land acknowledgement. Then we sat, and Dr. Manson asked, "Let me introduce yourself." So we introduced. That's when I learned that young woman who walked in with this strange dude, right, is the person who was harmed. And I'm like, wow, okay. And then the dude said, "I'm here to, help her, through this process." I still didn't know everything, right? So peace goes around, talking peace. We all introduced ourselves. We asked the young man, "So what happened that day?" And he said, "Well, we were just hanging out at Jimmy Lee Center, and just, folk came around, dudes, like my boys came around, they picked me up in this car, then we drove around, and we picked up another brother, and then we got too many people in the car, so we went and looked for another car, we busted up another car, and we drove." "You were bored?" I said, "Yep." And the mother grabs the mic and said, "Yeah, and she said, "I didn't raise you this way, bro." She didn't say bro, she said. So, and the piece goes from the mother to Dr. Manson. Dr. Manson said, "Yeah, we read the case. Want to invite you to speak." And this young woman grabs the opportunity and said, "The car that you trashed, $8,000 damage. It was my car." That day, that morning, I woke up and my husband lost a family member. So he rushed home to the funeral to take care of the family. And I had to be there in the next couple of days for the funeral. And I had 3 jobs I'm managing. And this young man, his whole body started to sink. And his hoodie came on, and he just did this. And she said, "Listen, I'm not here to shame you. I'm not here to question you. I just want you to know that this is how your behavior has impacted me." Y'all, that would never happen in a courtroom. And she said, "But I brought you a gift." And he's like, "What?" And we were all, I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is gonna be interesting." She brought out 2 bottles, like they're yay high. She said, "I'm gonna keep one of this, and I wanna give you one." And he grabbed it, and he didn't even look at it. She said, "I want you to look at this. What do you see at the bottom?" And she said, he's like, "These are broken glasses." "Yeah, those are the glasses that you broke in my car, and I picked up those shreds and put it in." And he's like, "Wow." She said, "Right above it, the next layer are rocks. Right? This is the harm that you have caused. The rocks are the pathways, right, that you have to cross, because I know your life is hard. You are not going to be able to pay me back the $8,000. I know. Being a black woman, I know. I understand what you're going through. Right? So let us cross that path. And the next layer," she said, crystals. She said, "I know you are the crystal, but we'll get there together." Right? The young man sat up, moved his hoodie, and looked at her, and I said, "I'm sorry." That will never happen in a courtroom, y'all. And that is just one story. Right? So give it up for Dr. Manson for his work. And this can every young person, every staff, and every person in our spaces, right? So let us undo prisons as we know it.
Yes. Bo. So we had until 2:05 to talk and then questions, and it's 2:04. So I feel like we can go a little bit long because
No,
I'm sure
Sarah-
we answered
Sarah's
everyone's
already
questions.
saying,
Oh, is
like,
Sarah
hell
like
no.
stop?
that's okay, Bo should go ahead, but then we do have questions from the audience.
Okay, cool. So yeah.
We have questions?
I did- Okay. Well, maybe we can weave your stories into your answers. Okay, we'll just go to questions. Was that me? I don't think it's me.
No, it's ours.
Okay.
It might be Miss Lacombe, sorry.
Who's got the question? I'm gonna throw the talking piece to you.
And my hands are full with this Lacombe mic, so I will drop it if you throw it at me. Thank you. We're gonna start with sort of a practical question, which is what kind of training
And who
goes
are you?
into
I'm
restorative
sorry,
practice?
I don't know who you are.
My name is Josh Peterson, I work for the County Training Office.
Okay.
What kind of training goes into restorative practices, being a restorative practices facilitator or operating restorative practices program? What does that look like?
I got a whole lot
Does
of
anyone
answers.
want to take it? Or
Go ahead.
It's challenging to frame it that way. I would call it mentorship. And like, it's like inheriting a lineage. And in the professional space, it's spending a lot of time together in circle, building relationship and trust, so that you are building your capacity to hold space for somebody else. And kind of how I was saying before, like talking about my own healing and restoring my own relationships, I am much more able to hold braver spaces for families I work with because of my own path of healing. And so I feel like workspaces and institutions can create those spaces by ceding their time to us to do that work together, so that we trust each other deeply enough to embrace our young people and our families. So like sometimes we set minimums on the amount of time that we're, like, we partner with school districts and we believe deeply on, like, you need to give us at least 4 days consecutive together to even have the relationship, because we might not have the conflict we need to have until day 4, because we're just being nice to each other. Like we've talked about Minnesota nice a lot, we might not have the real conversation, or we might not feel brave enough to say the thing until then. So I would call it mentorship and like inheriting lineage, and for purposes of what you're gonna build, I guess you could call it training. Other people.
I would say the language of training is very colonial as
That's
well. I like anytime, there's a space that's training, in my head, I turn it to shared learning. Anytime you go into a space, you're gonna teach, you're gonna learn, and that's like a restorative practice. So I think if we would shift that into how do we create shared learning spaces for folks to onboard, it would kind of change the whole way in which we see the need for folks to get more information around restorative practices.
Yeah. Just to add on, thank you, bro, for saying that, right? Because we are stuck in this idea that everybody can be trained to do a restorative circle. I say, no, right? It's not about a 4-day training, right? It is more about how you're experiencing this in your body, right? If you do not understand somatic liberation, get out of here. Right? No, I love you. But, right? This is about how you experience stuff in your body, right? In the healing circle, in the healing world, we often say, Enka Mendofe say, right? This is about practice, not staged book reading chapter, blue book for restorative practices, right? To hell with that. What's the first question I need to ask? Oh my God! No, come on, bro. Are you feeling this in your body? Right? So, I don't want to institutionalize this over and over, right? Let's experience this. That story that I just shared with you, I hope it's not here. This is not time for intellectual masturbation no more. Y'all are supposed to laugh. Y'all are too serious, right? Get out of your headspace, come into your body, right? Because I hope that story, it sits here in your heart space, not in your head, right? And be value-centered, those are experiences that we can have in 4 days, 5 days. Sharon runs a retreat, right? That you can experience this in your body. This is not about training, right? So again, I love y'all.
You do have more audience.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
We had a couple of questions around some challenges that might arise during the process, particularly around if the person who is harmed doesn't want to participate in the process, then what happens in that case? And also, what happens if you hit an impasse in the circle process? So what does that look like?
Yeah, thank you. Looks like Sharon, you'd like to take that one? You looks like you're like.
What was the first part of it? Oh, there are many ways to have that conversation. We reach out to someone who's been harmed. Again, there's a ripple. So I want to be clear that we reach out to everyone that there might have been a ripple sent out to by a certain situation or behavior. If people don't want to participate, we're always mindful of what do you need. Would you like your own circle to have a conversation about how you're feeling after this happened? Would you like someone to sit in for you and share how that made you feel, but you don't want to be there? Do you want to send a letter? So there are many different opportunities that we try to provide so everyone has what they need to feel okay about it, but still share the impact of that behavior. And then the second part.
Impasse during the circle process, how do you navigate through that?
Oh, well, if there's not an impasse, we're not doing it right. Because there are so many different people that are coming together in the circle, and one of the biggest things is we make decisions by consensus. So there will be times we take a break. We'll talk about it again at the next circle. There will be times where 3 hours later, we've decided what we all can live with in this situation. But if we're not coming into that space of things getting hard and real, we're not doing the work, in my opinion, or creating a space that's allowing for deeper things to come out. So I think that would be the answer that I would give.
Thank you. And maybe we'll end with one that's a little bit more forward-looking, which is what would it look like for cities to invest in restorative justice diversion? Is that possible? Has it been successful in other jurisdictions? And maybe I'll just make it a little bit bigger, which is sort of if you had a magic wand and you could think about sort of how we integrate restorative practices into community, into systems, into government or not government, what would that look like?
Oh,
If it's okay with you, I'll kind of, I have a thought and then want you all to tell me if it's stupid.
yes.
So what my vision is for like state dollars is that we obviously need to invest a lot in community-based organizations and programs, and that investment needs to be sustainable. So that's my vision, is that we just pour dollars into the community-based organizations that partner with law enforcement in counties and cities. And obviously that's at the state level, but that's kind of what I would like to do. And are there, like, what are the roadblocks and hurdles, or is that a bad idea and there's a better way?
You know, so there's an international experiment that was done by the World Health Organization and others, and they say that they're going to pick 4 different types of community projects, right? And so one community, they say, we're going to give you $100,000 now, and we're going to leave you alone. They came to the next organization and say, there is $100,000, but we're going to give you monthly payments. But there is $100,000. And the next group, they came in and say, well, we're going to give you $1,000, but we don't know what's coming next. And then the next group, they say, we're giving you nothing, right? And over the past 10, 20 years, they realized that the community that was trusted with $100,000, they were not in crisis no more. They were not at risk no more. Because they built up their community, right? They knew exactly what they needed. But systems often say, oh, no, we can't trust you, we'll give you this, and then ask you to evaluate. but hire a statistician and all of these things to give me data. And your data was not presented well, so sorry, right?
Yes.
And so we give the community that had a glimmer of hope, saying like, there is more money, so I'm going to invest some of this, right? They didn't thrive as well as the other community that had a full total trust investment, right? And the next group did nothing because they say, what the hell? I'm just going to go for immediate gratification. This delayed gratification is good for white folks and rich folks, right? So how do we create hope? Is to stop saying to us, this is like, I'm sorry, we're gonna give you this much money, right? And then see how well you do. I'm like, why? Right? We wanted to build a stadium for men in tight pants to run around some stupid ball. They look good in tight pants, right? We invested $1.2 billion and they keep letting us down.
That's true. But the 49ers never let us down, right, Curtis?
Shut up. Right? So, and then we were not happy. We invested $550 million for men in tight pants to hit a ball. Right? Was it softball, baseball, whatever
Do
they call
not
them?
diss baseball.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
a bridge too far.
Right? So we keep building this type of stadiums, right? Because we invest in them. In our community, we say, no, you gotta comply, otherwise we'll enforce.
Get the taxes.
Right, yes. Right, so there are ways to do this work, but you don't trust us. You don't allow us to flourish in our agencies. Because you say you have to have a degree, you have to pass a state board, and you have to statistically datarize us. I say, fuck that. Okay.
I would say, I want to second what Professor Raj said. If it's not given to community with sovereignty, what happens is then the restorative practice still has the backdrop of the system. So the enforcement agency under it sounds really nice in those circles and everything that we're talking about. But on the back end, it's actually a threat if you don't comply, right? It's a bunch of pretty language, but on the back end of that language is, my body and my freedom is on the line. So we just need to go top level, take that out of the backdrop. And if we take that out of the backdrop, then community can be trusted to build on their own. As long as the system is peeking over community's shoulder, the system is more powerful than us, unfortunately.
That's right.
With that, I was going to say that spending time with people who are most impacted, getting on the same page that we are in alignment, unified, and that we have unity behind this, then that's when it will be successful. And that requires making spaces that are accessible, like childcare, transportation, food, like things we like to do together. We need to create those spaces so that we can get on the same page that this is what we want. Because like earlier conversations highlighted, no community is a monolith, and we aren't necessarily all on the same page about how we want to move together. So in the next year, I'm really hoping we can spend time together and talk about how we want to do this differently.
I just wanted to share really quick one of the most exciting outcomes. You go into it and people ask, what are you gonna track? One thing that we weren't planning on tracking but tracked was that we stopped placing our children out of the home in detention centers in foster care. We went from $656,000 down to $50,000 in out of home placement. That our county commissioners and everyone then said, oh yeah, thank you, we'll put more money into that. So if anyone ever wants to see that data too, because it took us a while to do that, I don't think everyone should have to prove it. I oftentimes sat at county board saying, you came in and asked for a snowplow, well, you don't know what's gonna snow, look at this year, right? So, glad to share any of that data with you.
I would say, I think that there are gaps between what's happening in Hennepin County and what's happening in Yellow Medicine County. direction, I think, just a titch, right? And I think that it's important for folks here to know that we don't have nonprofits who are doing any work at all. Right? Like, we don't have that. So if you want to start a nonprofit and come on out, I'm all about it. Because our only option is county. That's what we got. And so I think that it's important doing this work. This goes back to what Sharon's saying, right? Like, don't do it like we're doing it. Because it ain't going to work the way it worked for us. We don't have all of you wonderful people who are doing all of the wonderful work. We don't got it. So, yeah, anytime you want to come, let us know. We'll, you know, we can use it.
Yeah, and I think to kind of wrap it up, the takeaway that I have is that restorative practices are community driven, they're individualized, they're going to be different from child to child and community to community and geographically across the state of Minnesota. But what we've seen is that they work, and when the system gives up that power and control to the community, that can be a very effective way to support youth and families and communities. So it's kind of incredible. But if we give up power as the system, like the community will function better. So that's my takeaway. I don't know as a state legislator what that means I should do with my time, but I'm trying to give up my power.
Please join me in thanking Representative